Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week could best be described as a giver, a mental health nurse who's been on the board of a charity, written Britain's #2 parenting blog, and arranged a charity walk that bisected Britain, which raised tens of thousands for those struck by horrendous misfortune. He not only brings comfort and aid to the most vulnerable in our society, but he's managed to have a byline as the host of gaming's first legitimate comedy podcast, This Game is Broken. My guest this week is Dan Hughes. Welcome, Dan.
Hello.
So, first of all, how hard was it for you to choose these games?
It was quite hard, I must admit. I took the brief very seriously. So these aren't necessarily my top 5 games. These are the games that I genuinely would want with me during a kind of apocalyptic type situation, which is one of my worst nightmares, actually. And it's something that keeps me awake at night. So thanks for putting that.
No problem. I like to make people paranoid. So what criteria did you use? Was it sentimentality? Was it pure practicality that, it's something that I can play longest and that sort of stuff?
Yes, that was basically it. I needed longevity. I needed variety within the game, so I wouldn't get bored of it after 10 plays. And I needed it to fit various different situations, various different gaming moods I can find myself in, really. So I needed a wide variety, and every one of them needed to have some kind of longevity to them. So yeah.
So this is a question I've been asking a few of my guests. Why game? What value do you see in it?
I think I'm quite a socially inept person at the core of it. I mean, I can falsify social aptitude.
How does this manifest itself?
I suppose it manifests itself in kind of, I suppose you'd call it social anxiety or just awkwardness or not quite knowing where to put yourself in a situation with new people, really. I'm very comfortable with people I know well. I'm very comfortable in a position where I have a level of power or seniority over other people. But I'm not very comfortable on a kind of meeting people on an eye-to-eye level. And I don't think many people are really, well, that's not true, but I think there are lots of people in a similar situation to me. And for me, gaming is that great level. If you want to meet new people, but you don't feel confident in talking to them and small talk, I'm dreadful at small talk, then you've got a board there to look at. And then you look up, you look at them in the eye, you talk to them for a bit, and then you look back down on the board. I think it's the great level I've met. I've got dozens and dozens more friends now than I ever did before I really got into board gaming, and that's purely down to the social lubricant that gaming kind of provides me, I think. And
the people you know in gaming, are they friends or are they people with whom you play games? There's a split, I think. I would certainly consider some of them friends. Some of them I've gone away with. Some of them I spend time with socially. Outside of gaming, although not very often, to be fair, thinking about it. But no, some I definitely consider friends, people I can rely on, people I can chat to. But they kind of, I'd say about 80% are kind of acquaintances. And then there's that kind of 5% which you wouldn't, they're just sacks of meat to move pawns around with, basically. And so gaming, obviously, from the work you've done on the Dice Tower, has bled into your family life. What benefit do you think gaming brings to the parent-child relationship? I think gaming is a massively useful tool for a parent and child. Yes, I was talking mainly about my own social life there, but being able to game with my kids is a wonderful way of bonding with them, a wonderful way of an educational without being preachy type thing. You can see my youngest Cora develop through the games. You can see her being quite advanced in logical thinking, just purely from the games we play together. And it's another structured way of playing on a kind of equal level
playing field without that power dynamic of the parent-child, or with less of a power dynamic. You know, you can never eradicate that completely. And the way of connecting with your kids, that doesn't involve a screen. That doesn't involve you forcing them to do something they don't want to do. It's a shared activity that's equally enjoyable for both of them. I mean, you may not be getting the same level of enjoyment out of the game because you're going to be playing pretty basic games with the kid, but you're enjoying their company and they're enjoying your company. And that's invaluable really in a parenting relationship.
And do you think gaming is devalued? It's looked down upon in the benefits that it can give in a social context, but also in an educational context? I don't know. I do know people who game with kids for a living. Imagination Gaming, the people who do the games for the UK Games Expo, they're based in Huddersfield, or certainly were until very recently. And they go around schools and libraries and things like that. The local libraries around here all have a board game selection. Cora goes to a board game club at school, although it's filled with Kaplunk and you know, Buckaroo and things, but still. And part of the, when Cora went to school, before she went to school, the part of the letters that we got to say how to prepare your kids for school was like, teach them to tie their shoelaces, teach them to get their coat on, and play as many board games with them as possible, because it's that structure and the educational benefits it gets for it. So I don't know if you want me to say no. I don't think that, but I think many teachers, value play as a learning experience, really. So let's go back to the beginning. You grew up in a town or a village, would you call it?
I think it's officially a town. It's on that borderline between town and village, I'd argue.
But for all of those people who aren't British, this might be one of the most famous town/villages in the country. You grew up in a place called Holmfirth in Yorkshire, which is a very beautiful place, but is also the setting for a very famous British sitcom called Last of the Summer Wine, which is, I guess, classic Sunday night viewing. How was it growing up in a place that was constantly besieged by television cameras and actors and well-known faces?
Well, obviously, when you're growing up, you don't notice anything different. I mean, I was right in the middle of it. My house, my home was directly opposite one of the main characters' homes within the series, Clegg. And so we had film cameras outside our doors, for 6 months of the year. And the film crew were all very friendly, gave me cakes and things from their lunch things. Occasionally you had to go the long way around when you walked from school because you couldn't go through a place because they were filming there. But Holmfirth's a very interesting town in that its kind of destiny was very, very, very tied up with that sitcom. It's the longest sitcom in the world, longest running sitcom in the world. I think Simpsons may have just beat it now. But it was going for a long time, 25 years, I think. And it was very much centered in the town. It wasn't just occasional outside shots. It was most of the activities were outside in the local area, shot on location. So it had a very big identity with the village. And it gave me very much a sense of pride, really. The place where I live is worthy of all this attention. And it made me appreciate the beauty of where I live, because it is a very beautiful area. There's many TV shows set around here just because of the beauty of the Huddersfield and the surrounding area, Holmfirth. And yeah, it gave me a real pride in where I lived. And
Last of the Summer Wine is kind of unique in that most of the cast were elderly. Was there a fear, if the fortunes of the town were connected, was there a fear that the cast would pop their clogs and it would no longer be a factor? It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, this is a show that was based on pensioners, and it started it lasted for 25 years. These actors got very, very elderly while they did this. Two of them are buried in the town itself. They love the town so much. I think there probably was. I think there was definitely kind of the Chamber of Commerce and things like that. I was involved in the Amateur Dramatics Society over there. And Bill Owen, who played Compo, actually was in one of our productions. I mean, that's how kind of tied to the town he was. He recorded the voice for a character and stuff, but still, it showed quite a love for the community there. And I think around the edges, the shopkeepers especially are very aware, and certainly
It's gone downhill a little now, although it got so middle class from the attention that this program showed it, that it's kind of a self-sustaining middle class area now. As when the show first started, it was very working class and was actually quite a grimy place to be, apparently. And it kind of rose as the tourism just pumped more and more money into the area. So yeah, I think there was a fear. I mean, they're still doing Last of the Summer Wine tours now, and it's been over for 10 years. It's that ingrained in the public consciousness.
So moving on to your first game then, you've chosen probably not only the biggest, most recognisable game, but possibly the most influential game. I think this is a game that has influenced computer games incredibly, but it's also influenced film and television. And you've chosen Dungeons and Dragons. Firstly, why?
Well, as I say, I thought long and hard about this question, and Dungeons and Dragons, or any role-playing game really, but Dungeons and Dragons is the one that sprung to mind, is the most long-lived. It's the game that has got the most replayability of all the games, because it's limited only by your own imagination, really. It's a game that you can play over and over again without seeing the same thing. It's a game you can play repeatedly with the same group of people, and it only gets better with repeated plays, not gets more and more dull. So it's cheating a little bit. It's not a board game, but it's so intrinsically woven into most board gamers' kind of being. It was a gateway game for many people of my generation, you know, the 40-year-olds or so. Maybe not so much the younger crowd coming through. Maybe I don't think Dungeons and Dragons has the same kind of cultural clout that it did 20 years ago, in the 80s. But still, it's woven in there. And you'd be hard pressed to find a gamer my age who didn't play D&D when they were 18.
So, what was your first experience with D&D?
I kind of started hanging around with a bunch of, I suppose you'd call them geeks, I don't know, a bunch of friends when I was 17, 18, who were playing it. And then I quickly kind of said, I got into that. I played a couple of things, and then suddenly found myself as the DM and loved it. I mean, I was dreadful.
How is someone dreadful at D&D?
Well, because I tried to plan everything, and then when they didn't go the way I wanted them to go, I was completely lost. But I credit D&D with a lot of my kind of personal development almost, between that and amateur dramatics that I did when I was younger. It brought me out myself. I was an incredibly shy kid. I mean, I talk about myself being socially inept now, but I was painfully shy to the point of disability when I was a young kid. And those two things, D&D giving me the confidence to kind of improvise and put myself forward, and amateur dramatics to stand on a stage and perform lines, both pushed me forward as a human being, I think. I think D&D is really valuable for that. I think it can really bring people out themselves, and I think it's probably responsible for a lot of quite socially inept people's personal growth. I think it's wonderful is role playing. I really do.
So I think you've pretty much already answered this question, but do you think D&D really does deserve the reverence it commands?
I think so. I think it's a game that is apart from, and if you want to go really geeky now, apart from 4th edition, which was universally kind of disliked, it's kind of a game that in each iteration has been the top of its class, really. You know, you had the basic D&D. That was before my time, but then 2nd edition D&D, that was the kind of pinnacle of role-playing games. 3rd edition brought in kind of weird kind of copyright laws where other people were allowed to develop stuff for them, and that really kind of boosted the role-playing industry. And now 4th edition failed, but 5th edition is bringing people back, and everyone's talking about how elegant and lovely the system is, and it is. I mean, I'm playing it at the moment. It's a fantastic system. Best one I've played, and it, you know, I know there are all these independent ones, but D&D is just your bread and butter, your basic, really solid bedrock for role-playing games to go off, and there's never really been an equal in my view.
So are you running a game at the moment? Or
Yeah. I'm GMing a game at the moment. Yeah, just getting back into it. I'm very much an omni gamer. I like to play lots of things. I like to play lots of genres. I like to play the best something can offer, really. And D&D, that's the pinnacle of RPGs for me.
And do you hope one day to play with your kids, or are you playing with your kids already?
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. But the way I play D&D is quite boisterous. And I don't know if I'll ever have that level of boisterousness with my kids. the kind of insulting and teasing and, you know, that kind of banter, for a better word. I know it's not the best word in the world. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Again, there's a dynamic between a parent and a child, which I'm not sure is ideal for that, you know, but it'd be interesting to try it. Really, what I want them to do is discover that for themselves with their own friendship groups. I think D&D is something to play with friends. And I got some very, very valuable friends I'm still friends with now. I'm still very good friends with all the people I used to play D&D with. I still see them regularly. It's a bonding experience for a friendship group rather than a parent and child, I think.
So you studied media studies, and then you decided it wasn't for you, and you took pretty much a 180-degree turn, and you became a nurse. What was the motivation behind that?
I was watching Deep Impact. Have you ever seen Deep Impact with Morgan Freeman and virtually every single actor in the world?
Thankfully, I haven't. No.
Well, there's a scene in Deep Impact where they're filling up the kind of shelters, basically, in order to repopulate the earth at a later point. And the people going to the shelters are all the people that are useful in society. And I looked at my media studies degree and I thought, journalism, And then I thought to myself, would I be in that shelter? Would I be somebody who would be useful to society? And quite frankly, I wouldn't. There's very little value in a journalist, certainly not the kind of journalist I was training to be. I had a look at my life and I looked at what I valued. And while I was at university, I did a Samaritans, a suicide helpline type. I was involved with that kind of organisation. And I got very heavily involved in that. And I looked at that and I thought, this is what I really find valuable. I've never enjoyed work. I've never been somebody who, you know, people say, find what your passion is and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, that's never been me. As soon as I get paid for anything, I resent it bitterly. But I think it's more important to believe in what you work is rather than to enjoy your work. And I certainly believe in what I do now. Obviously, I'm a nurse, but I'm also a mental health nurse. So I'm a psychiatric nurse. And, you know, I help people, I would like to think, or at least I try and help people. And that's important. And it's something that I would get put in the shelter for and survive the rest of you bastards.
And so why did you go into mental health nursing as opposed to standard nursing, for want of a better term?
Well, I did start training as a general nurse. And I did a few placements. So you go to various wards and things like that. And it was okay. You know, I did a stroke ward. I wiped people's bums. You know, I helped them to the toilet. I helped feed them. It was all very rewarding. And then I went, as part of your nurse training back then, it's not the same now, but as part of your nurse training back then, used to do a children's ward placement, used to do a maternity, so he used to with the midwives, and he used to do one with people with learning difficulties, and he did one with people with mental health problems. And I just saw what they were doing there, and I thought, this is so much better suited to me, being the non-dexterous, clumsy fool that I am, you know, giving intricate injections and all that kind of stuff, or I can be sat down with somebody in the house and talking to them. And I was much better at talking to them. As bad as I am at small talk and things, I like to think I'm quite good at making quite a deep personal connection with somebody relatively quickly and being there for them. And that's what I ended up enjoying. So I decided to switch from general nursing to mental health nursing and then quickly kind of followed from there really and did my nurse training, got a succession of jobs and here I am.
And so without being too specific, what is the role of a mental health nurse?
There's a variety of roles. There's a variety of different roles. What I have done for the majority of my career is I've worked in crisis teams. So a crisis team is you would get a phone call from the police or A&E or a GP saying that somebody was suicidal or acting very bizarrely or their family couldn't cope with them or whatever. And I would go out, I would assess that person. So on my own, I'd either go to the police cells, I'd go to A&E, I'd go to their home, I would talk to them, I would assess what's going on and assess the risks of what's going on, you know, the risk to the person's self, the risk to other people around them, the risk of self-neglect, all these kind of different risks. I could go through them all, but I won't. And then I'd make a decision about what to do about that person. So whether that person needed to be in hospital, whether that person just needed a quick word there and there. I mean, you'd be amazed how many suicidal people that turn up at A&E you can sit down with for an hour, 2 hours, talk them through what's going on, send them on their way, and they never need any input ever again. Or there's the other thing that I used to do, which is provide what we call home-based treatment. So that's somebody who's quite poorly, but doesn't need hospital. We like to keep people out of hospital if possible because hospital is not a particularly therapeutic place. It's full of people who are quite disturbed. It's a place where all responsibility is taken away from you. So you never learn to cope with a crisis, because if you put in hospital every time there's a crisis, then you just let the hospital cure it, and then you go home, and then the next crisis, you haven't got those tools to deal with that crisis yourself, basically. So we treat them at home. We visit them every day. I mean, we can visit people up to 3 times a day, provide some very intensive input, get them reviewed by medics. Obviously, medication is very useful. And then hopefully when things start improving, we can discharge them or send them to another service that's slightly less intensive or something like that. That's basically what I do in a nutshell.
So I had the unfortunate situation to have to spend time in a hospital because a family member was dying. And the nurses offered an incredible support. They did an incredible job. But one thing I noticed was how hard they worked and how harrowing the job must be at times. How do you cope?
I think everything, you get used to things, if that makes any sense. People sometimes say, I couldn't deal with the stress in your job, but I don't think my job is particularly any more stressful than anyone else's. It's just I think there's levels of stress that you can cope with, levels of stress you can experience. And I don't think my level of stress is any different to anyone else's working in a high-pressured accountancy firm or whatever. We feel stress in the same physiological way. I suppose the key is not to take that stress home with you. And that's very key. And the way I cope is by having, you have your armor, you need to be there for the person, but you need to be aware that you're a professional and they are the patient, and there's a barrier between you, unfortunately. It's not the same as talking to your best friend who's suicidal, because that goes right into your core. You need that sheen of an armor to try and, protect yourself, because you need to protect yourself. You can't give 100% to absolutely everybody because you just combust, I think. I keep my private life and my professional life very separate. I mean, some people, I know my friend Nick Murphy, who I do a podcast with, he's a drugs and alcohol worker. He works in a rehab centre for people with drugs and alcohol problems, and he uses board games within his therapy. And people have asked me if I do that, and I don't, because I want that separate. And I don't socialise with any of my workmates, because I want as soon as I get in my car journey is my decompressing time, and I'm no longer thinking about work when I go through my front door. And I think if I was thinking about work, then that's when things start to crumble, really. I mean, I'm fortunate in the type of team I work in is that we work in a team-based approach. But that doesn't matter. But basically what happens is, if I'm very concerned about somebody, I say to the next person, I'm really concerned about them, and then it's their responsibility, if that makes any sense. And so by that way I can go home and try not to. I mean, occasionally I do worry about people, but most of the time I'm able to go home and be satisfied that they're being looked after by somebody else.
So we move from the stress of work to the stress of not being able to get the amount of tricks that you bid on. Your next game is the king of trick-taking games, one of the most enjoyable games I've ever played. Probably my number 3 in all-time favourite games ever, and this is Skulking. Explain why Skulking is so good.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if the game itself is good. I think it's a great game. I'm not actually an expert in trick-taking games. I think this is probably the only one I've ever played. I played Chronicle once and didn't understand it because I didn't quite understand what a trick-taking game was. I've never played Skull King when I haven't had a riotous time. I've never played Skull King when everybody in the table hasn't been laughing, joking, giving each other trash talk, all that kind of stuff. It's always been a game that's kind of elicited fun. It's kind of the embodiment of fun in board gaming for me. It's not particularly take-thatty, although there is a bit of take-that around the edges. It's the perfect length. It's basically a game where it's a trick-taking game where you're just betting on how many tricks you can take, ultimately. And it kind of goes on for 10 rounds. And as I say, I've never played it and not had a thoroughly fantastic time. And everyone I've played it with has ended up buying their own copy. And reporting the same. It's just a wonderful game. It's so cheap. It's so cheap. And it's such a fantastic game. It reminds me of those times that, I don't know if you did it yourself, Ben, but when I was doing my A-levels, when I was sixth form college, about 17, 18, playing with a group of friends, cards in the common room, obviously not skulking, but that kind of camaraderie and that kind of, doesn't really matter who wins, but the joking and the side conversations and it's like the beginning of Roseanne. That's what it feels like for me playing Skull King.
I think it's really interesting because I played a lot of trick-taking games and I played a lot of card games when I was doing my A-level. But these hobby traditional card games are interesting because they have a definite end point, whereas the other games you just play ad infinitum.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and I think some of the traditional games are really overlooked by gamers as well. I'm sure if you got a deck of cards out, I mean, I really should have said a deck of cards, shouldn't I? Although I don't know that many traditional deck of cards games, but there's nothing wrong with them. It's just a snobism that it needs to be its own printed card that that gamers, desire.
So where did you find out about Skull King?
I played it at a convention. My friend Luke, played it at a convention, and I instantly went out and bought it. And then I played it at the next convention, I went to. It's a game I play with friends, but usually in a large group setting rather than just at a normal games night. It's one I bring out, when I went to Dice Tower Con, I introduced a load of people to it there. I go to a gaming event called StabCon in Manchester, play it there. Every year I organise a small kind of almost my own gathering of friends in the Yorkshire Dales where 20, 30 people come together for a weekend to play games, and I play it there. Kind of an event card game for me, really. It's not one I just get out at a normal games night, although I have done, and it's gone down equally as well. It's just wonderful.
And so why are you taking this one to the cabin?
Well, I'm taking this one because I've never not played it and not had a great time. And I'm guessing in the apocalypse, great times are going to be pretty hard to come by. So yeah, it fills the niche of that, as I say, that Roseanne game, the having fun with your friends. It's the epitome of fun in gaming for me is this one. So
you started writing a parenting blog. Firstly, explain what the blog was, because I think the end result of this blog was pretty astonishing.
It was just a place where I recorded, various trials and tribulations of being a father. And at that point, I was a part-time stay-at-home dad as well. My wife worked full-time and I worked part-time. And this was for my youngest child, Amy, who's now 14, but was about 2 at the time. So it's quite a long time ago. And it's back where blogging, back when blogging was king, when people actually used to read blogs. And they kind of, I just did it as a way of a creative exercise, really. I've always done something creative, something just for its own sake. And I wanted to kind of document my kids growing up. I wanted to amuse other people. And I just started writing, and interacting with people on the internet. As we all do these days. Back then it wasn't Web 2.0 where it's all hosted on Facebook or something like that. This was kind of, everyone had their own site and you went and read everyone else's blogs and interacted in that way. It was very, very, it's a Wild West really, a very punk rock way of doing it. We were all publishing our own little mini magazines talking about whatever we wanted to talk about.
And so what kind of things were you talking about? Were you offering advice or were you just blowing off steam?
No, I wasn't doing either of those things, really. I was more kind of humorous anecdotes, pretty saccharine stuff as well. Occasionally I'd run silly competitions. Occasionally I'd put out a kind of proto-podcast before even podcasting was a thing, I think, where I used to play pretend to be a radio DJ and play 10 songs and do a little bit of introduction between each one. To be honest, it's very difficult to remember. I used to write it daily for about 5 years. it's very difficult to remember what I put. It was whatever was on my mind, really. It was like a little mini editorial in my own newspaper. Very much a vanity project, but people used to enjoy reading it. And I gained a lot of friends. Again, this is a place that was a kind of nexus point of gaining friends for me. I've got friends all over the world through this that I'm still in contact with now.
And in the bio you sent me, you said that it was Britain's second most popular parenting blog. What does that mean in terms of numbers? How many people were reading it?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, these were metrics done by this external website, which was trying to monetize blogging, which was its ultimate downfall in my opinion. But for a while I was listed as being one of the most influential bloggers in the UK. I can't remember how they made it. It certainly wasn't my download numbers they weren't looking at, because I never gave them any. I don't know. I can't remember quite exactly how many. It kind of went into the thousands. I once got recognised in the street from my blog, which was exceptionally weird. But yeah, quite a few people used to read regularly. But it was more, it wasn't so much about the numbers really. It was more about the links you found with other bloggers. It was very incestuous, world, at that point, within blogging, and it still is, I think. Bloggers were reading each other's blogs. It wasn't a mass market type thing. People weren't all coming to read my blog. It was more of a community type effort. I always thought, and that's what I loved about it. And that's eventually what killed it, is that wall went away. Over time, more and more companies started trying to get people to be brand ambassadors and trying to get key influencers within the parenting. And it's back when Mumsnet was starting to come, quite big and all this kind of stuff. And, I took advantage for it a while. I got a free holiday to France out of it. I got a Blu-ray player back when Blu-ray players were quite exciting. Got sent to London by Disney who courted me, all sorts of stuff like that. But as I said to you before, the more kind of financial reward I get for something, the more I start resenting it. And it no longer felt like a creative exercise to me. It felt like a job. Is what it ended up feeling like. And it also, as my kids were getting older, it felt like I was exploiting them, very much like I do with Cora. Felt like I was exploiting them, to gain that audience, to gain that free holiday to France, to gain that DVD player, to gain that new thing or whatever. And I started to become very, very uncomfortable with it. And it started kind of withering and dying for me, that kind of medium, the blogging medium, certainly the parent blogging medium.
And so you never wanted to make that transition into being a professional blogger, a professional content creator? I did for a while. I used to write for Xbox. Xbox contacted me, and I got paid, I think, £100 for 500 words, and the 500 words I was giving them were just me, basically just churning out generic list, BuzzFeed list type stuff, or before that happened, but that's what it was. It was just all clickbait and that kind of stuff. And again, it killed it. I don't know what it is about being paid for things, but I stopped enjoying writing. Yeah, it's interesting. I've never been able to put my finger on it, but as soon as I get paid for something, I start resenting the time I spend on it. So, was it the blog that led you to being the chair of a charity or on the board of a charity? No. I've got one of my best friends from college, one of the people that I used to hang around with, one of the geeks, basically. He had a child, same age as my eldest, and when they were 3 years old, they died, unfortunately. They died of pneumonia. They just woke up in the morning, went into his room, and he was laying there dead. And this profoundly affected me. I mean, this was a child the same age as my daughter. This was somebody I grew up with. And they could have very easily been destroyed by that. And I think I probably would have been destroyed by that, if I'm absolutely honest. And, I'm not saying they weren't destroyed by it, but I'm not saying it's something they live with that every day of their lives, but they also managed to turn it into a positive force, really. They wanted to, his name was Joseph, and they wanted Joseph, if Joseph wasn't able to make his mark on the world himself, they wanted to do it on his behalf. And so they set up a charity, the Joseph Salmon Trust, who are a charity who basically they pay for funerals and headstones of children because when you lose a child, especially a young child, usually not in a particularly good financial situation, no new parent is, or no parent is really. We're all, it's not a time in life where you're comfortably off. And
often there's a real sense of duty and wanting to do the best by your child, and the need to do the last thing for them. And that's to give them a funeral. And, you know, a cheap funeral just doesn't feel right. And, you know, they want a headstone they can visit. Usually people who've lost children want the child to be buried rather than cremated, so they can go somewhere and visit them and use it as a kind of focus for their grief. And that's what they do. They buy headstones for people. It's not always that. Sometimes if somebody's self-employed, they might give them some money to tide them over so they can take some time off work, in order to grieve. And it's something I really believe in strongly. And because I was his friend and because I wanted to support, it kind of became almost a mission for me to raise as much money for this charity as possible, just to show my friend that I cared about what he was going through.
And so you told me that these two things came together in that you arranged a charity walk, and people who had read your blog joined you on this.
Yes, yeah. We had about 40 people walk the length of Hadrian's Wall, which is basically an old Roman wall that used to separate Scotland from England. So we walked the width of the country. We had people from America, quite a number of people from America. We had people from Holland, and people from all over the UK. We had army majors. We had a professor of marketing. We had a not dustbin man. We had a policeman. We had people who just worked in mills. We had every ilk, shape, and you know, and they were all brought together. But I mean, it sounds quite egotistical to say, but they're all brought together by either the blog. They're all readers of the blog, and obviously Joseph's death and things like that became quite a focus of my blogging for a while. Or they were friends I'd met personally, or friends of Neil, who was the father of Joseph, and we just came together and walked the length of the country, the width of the country rather. That length would be a bit further, over a number of days, and it was a kind of life defining moment, really. It was incredibly stressful because I worked on this for a year before it happened. There was a lot of organisation that went into it. It's quite a logistical nightmare, as much as anything else, finding places for people to sleep. But we did it, and we raised about, I think, 35 grand, which is a year's wages, which I'm happy with. You know, I feel that's a very productive use of the time I spent. And you know, it wasn't just me. You know, the people who went with me did a lot of fundraising. You know, it was a real group effort, and you know, it was very rewarding. But that was the death of the blog, actually, because it was so much energy to put that into place. One of the people who they didn't actually walk it, they cycled it. A group of people cycled it as well. And they said every time they do a long cycle ride, they end up throwing their bike into the corner of the garage and never touching it again for 6 months because they're so tired of it. And that's what happened with me. I put so much energy into the blog and so much energy into organising this thing that as soon as it was over, I threw the blog into the corner of the garage. And by the time I even looked at it again, you know, that whole urge to create it had passed for me. So that was the death of it. But it went out in a blaze of glory, and you know, I'm glad it went because we managed to help a lot of people.
So your next game is much different to your previous two, whereas your previous two are, one is light and riotous and raucous, and the other one is very much story based. This one is a heavy strategy game. This is Nippon. Why did you choose this one?
Probably mainly because I'm very good at it. I don't know why, but there's something about Nippon that just clicks in all my brain. And you know, I'm able to actually play it and win it. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm probably in my gaming taste, tend towards the medium to heavy Euros. That's what I probably play most of. And Nippon for me is one of the most perfect heavy, medium to heavy Euros. I don't know. It's about as heavy as I like going, to be fair. I don't like any fat. Played Lisboa the other day and it was just, no, too much. But Nippon, I just think it's very elegant. I think it interacts with itself very well. It's a action selection game, and it's an area control game, but I don't generally like area control games because it kind of triggers my lizard brain. I get very competitive and I don't like that feeling of aggression within myself. It's not something I enjoy. But I like games that do what they do best. I think D&D does what it does best. Skull King does what it does best. And Nippon for me is kind of it's the best Euro. I think it's lovely. The theme's not particularly important to me. It doesn't bother me at all. It's themes around the kind of industrialization of feudal Japan, I think. But I'm not bothered about theme because that's not what it's doing. I mean, it's tacked on. It's useful. It's there because it lets you have a shape on the board. But if I want theme, I'll go to D&D. But if I want thinky Euro-y-ness, I'll go to Nippon.
So why should people play Nippon?
Because it's good. This is why I'm not a board game reviewer, because it is good. Because it's elegant. It's very intricate. There's all sorts of wonderful systems that all interlocked love perfectly, and you can't do something without doing something else. You can't move that lever without turning that cog. You can't go up this track without first going up that track. But you need to do all this efficiently. You need to work out where you want to go and work out what you want to do, and you need to be thinking 4 or 5 turns ahead all the time because you're not going to get anywhere near winning unless that's where you're going. You can't just react to things. It's got to be all planned. And I really love it for that.
So I want to talk to you more broadly about mental health and society. Have you, in the time that you've been working as a mental health nurse, have you seen attitudes to mental health changing, broadly speaking? I
think broadly speaking, yes. I think certainly if you're talking about depression and anxiety, they become very, very accepted as conditions, especially kind of milder depression and anxiety. I think there's a real risk, of over-medicalizing things like worry, sadness, grief. We don't need to put tablets to human emotions, I don't think. In my job, I see the extremes. See the people in absolute torment of various things. So I've almost got kind of overexposure to these kind of things. I mean, and I've suffered with low moods. I've suffered with anxiety, and things. But I'm quite reluctant to label them as depression and anxiety because I've seen the extremes of depression. I've seen the extremes of anxiety. And I think sometimes medicalizing things can disempower the person as well. I think, we're in control of our own moods to a certain extent. Certainly people who are depressed aren't. And I'll be very clear about that. But we also can do things to make ourselves feel better. But if you abdicate all the power and the responsibility for your emotional well-being to a nameless disease and only medication can make me better, I think we do ourselves a disservice. I'm not saying depression doesn't exist. I'm not saying anxiety doesn't exist. It does because I've seen it and it's horrific. I'm not saying that people who say they're depressed aren't depressed either. I just think, I think sometimes we're too quick to medicalize human emotion at times. And sometimes, and we are all human and we all feel sad and we all feel worried and we all feel grief and we all feel loss. And that's fine because that's part of being alive. And we can do things to help us way out of that, and even medication to help our way out of it if we need to. But depression didn't exist before the pharmaceutical companies discovered antidepressants. It wasn't recognised as any kind of disease. And while I think that's wrong, I think sometimes we're in danger of going too far the other way and labelling.
Do you think we have an issue in the same way that a thing started to happen where people would get a cold and they would say they got the flu?
Yeah.
Do you think there's self-misdiagnosis?
I think so, but it's really difficult because people can take that kind of opinion as a personal attack, and it isn't. I once got in a big argument on the internet about whether everyone who's suicidal is depressed, and I was arguing, no, not everyone who's suicidal is depressed. Sometimes you're suicidal because life is shit, and it doesn't mean that you're depressed. It just means your life is shit. You've lost custody of your kids. You've broken up with your girlfriend, whatever. You're going through a normal human reaction. And one of the impulses in your mind is I can't take any more of this, and an impulsive suicide attempt. But somebody sitting down with you for 2 hours and the situation changing would cure all that. And if that's the case, then that's not a depression. But it's still valid. it's very difficult not to get yourself, I need to be very careful because it's very difficult not to kind of devalue people's experiences. I also think that things like, people can be quite belittling towards things like OCD. That really annoys me. I've met people with OCD, and it's not just, I need to be tidy, I need things in a straight line and things like that. It's a horrendously crippling disease. Just like severe anxiety is horrendously crippling and tormented. And we're going back to his mental health accepted. It is, but not the urine-soaked schizophrenic isn't accepted. People still shy away from that person. Not the really tormented person who believes everyone's out to get them and shouts in the street. We still shy away from that person, because they're scary. But these are the people I work with, and they get better, but there is very much a movement for depression and anxiety to be accepted. But I'd argue that the extreme forms of mental illness people are still quite scared of.
So, moving on, Railways of the World.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of a transition.
No, that's fine. So
Railways of the World.
Trains. Yeah, go on. What? Sorry.
Railways of the World. So train games are a closed book to me. Why should I like them? Is this not just one step away from the anorak and the notebook?
Well, I think as board gamers, we're in very dodgy territory if we start pouring scorn on other people's hobbies. I think one thing that we should have learned by now is that, people can like what they like. I'm not a train spotter, but I don't begrudge anybody who does. I'm not really a train game player. I just love this game. I've never played Steam. I've never played Age of Steam. I've certainly never played in the 18XX games. I've got no real desire to. But there's something about this game, and I think it is about, I think I may well enjoy those, but Railways of the World is so enjoyable for me to play that it may sound quite small-minded, but I've got no desire to move on from it. I'm happy just sat there playing Railways of the World. It's a lovely game. It's a pick up and deliver game where you're building a kind of network of rails and moving one cube to another cube and things like that. Again, it's a game where you need to kind of be planning ahead. It's a game where you're building something, and that's what I very much like in games as well. When you're building a network, when you can look at it at the end of the game and say, that's mine, I did that. It's got lovely, very, very simple rules, but very deep gameplay, and that's something else I really admire. I mean, that's where perhaps Nippon falls down, is that kind of beautiful simplicity of a pure Euro isn't there, or an old-fashioned Euro rather, isn't there. But Railways of the World really has, I think it's got about 4 or 5 things you can do on a turn. Each one is really quite simple, but the kind of, the greater picture that paints is a really kind of quite deep, complex game. It doesn't need this track up here and that track up there and need to twiddle that knob and twiddle this knob, which are all things I enjoy about Nippon, granted. But this just needs 4 actions. What are you going to do? And it'll all make a big tapestry, which is kind of greater than the sum of its parts. And that's what I think why I like Railways of the World. And you get to go choo choo whenever you move things around. So that's good as well. But generally, it's just that, again, I've never had a bad game of Railways of the World. Never had a game I've not enjoyed. It doesn't matter who I'm playing that game with. I always enjoy it.
You popped up. I first heard you on the Dice Tower podcast when you were talking about founding the Huddersfield Board Gamers and how to start a gaming group. And I was struck by this broad Yorkshire accent, which seemed slightly out of place in this podcast that was populated completely by Americans. But what made you decide to go into board game media?
Well, at that point, it was in order to try and get my board game group a few more members. I've always been subscribed strongly to the kind of idea that if you fancy doing something, you should just have a go at doing it. I was a big fan of the Dice Tower. There hadn't been a segment about how to start a board game group up. I had just, for about a year, I think, before I did that, I'd set up this board game group mainly in order to try and find people to play games with. And it had got off really well off the ground, and I'd spent a long time, I'd put a lot of enthusiasm into creating it. I'd spent a long time thinking about how to grow it. And I thought, do you know, another good way of growing it is to get it mentioned on the Dice Tower. And the best way of doing that is to throw a segment Tom's way and hope he accepts it. And he did. I mean, it took a long time for him to accept it. It took about 4 months of me trying to fight myself, wanting to send him an email saying, I sent you this thing. But eventually he listened to it and wanted it, and I got it on the show, and we did get a few members. And I also got some people kind of writing to me and saying they enjoyed it. And that kind of reminded me of the blogging days. So I thought, well, this is good. So I carried on. After a while, I kind of ran out of ideas, ran out of things I wanted to say. And rather than just repeat myself or kind of desperately scrabble around to kind of maintain a Z list, well, lower than that really, internet celebrity, I thought, well, I'll call it a day. And then so I stopped for about 6 months and then I was messing around with Cora, my youngest daughter, and I think I was on Reddit actually, and someone asked, what games do you play with your kids? And I started typing a reply, and I thought, actually no, I'll just film something, on my webcam, because I was in a creative mood, if you call that creativity, and I enjoyed doing it, and more to the point, Cora really enjoyed doing it, and I thought, well, I've already got Tom Vassel's email address, I'll throw him this for board game breakfast, which is something else I really enjoy. I used to really enjoy that kind of format of things. Well, still do. And then he accepted that, and then off we go, really. Away we go.
So you've got a new podcast, which I don't think you'd be offended if I said that it shamelessly ripped off the panel game structure. I mean, let's be frank. We're both of us in the process of ripping off a BBC Radio 4 structure here.
Yeah.
But, so you came up with a panel game, This Game Is Broken, which is a legitimate comedy board game show. How did you start this? Why did you start it? And how successful has it been?
I wanted, if I'm absolutely honest, I got bored of the same type of board game podcast that I was listening to. Once you get to a certain level within the hobby, and I think this is a pretty well documented kind of phenomenon, you start not wanting to look for new board games all the time. You've got your collection, you know what you like. You get one or two here and there, but you're no longer that kind of voracious consumer of board game media, voracious consumer of board games, getting 5 or 6 board games a month and building up this massive collection and things. So you start selling the stuff you don't really play that very often. You start refining your tastes and things like that. And as you do that, you tend to stop listening to board game podcasts, stop consuming board game media. At least I certainly did, because I wasn't interested in what was new quite so much, and I wasn't constantly on the lookout for things. And these shows, I mean, far be it from me to criticize anyone else, because I'm not saying I'm anything better, but it's the same stuff over and over again. And I wanted something else to listen to. And there wasn't anything else to listen to. There's a few podcasts here and there that did things differently. Yourself, the Dice Tower's always been very enjoyable. I won't mention all the ones because I'll miss somebody out. But I wanted something that was entertaining rather than informative. And I think that's something that's really missing. I think the board game media world is grown to a point where there's room for that now. I think initially there wasn't. Initially it was informative is the way to go, but now there's room for something that's entertaining, that's not really that bothered about informing anybody or anything, because you probably know it already. And so I wanted to entertain people, and I was very fortunate in that I know some very entertaining people who are significantly more entertaining than myself. And so I managed to persuade, well, I didn't persuade them, to be fair, they were straight on board. Matthew Jude, who is become a very good friend of mine, actually. I only knew him from saying hello because he was also a contributor on the Dice Tower. But I spent this weekend with him, actually. And then Dave Loser, who's a very talented stand-up comedian, well, improvisational comedian over in Germany. And then the brothers Murph, who are this kind of force of nature. And they're all Dice Tower contributors. And they're all very, very funny people. And I thought, I've always been a massive fan of the British board game format, which is kind of alien to a lot of Americans as well. I mean, I don't, some people know about it, but I think Wait, Don't Tell Me is kind of as close as it gets over there. People keep comparing us to Whose Line Is It Anyway, which we're nothing like really, but it's the closest comparison they can get to a kind of British, panel game. I think, I modelled ourselves on Nevermind the Buzzcocks and They Think It's All Over, which are two focused panel games focused on a particular topic, with music and sport, and with a bit of I'm sorry, I haven't a clue thrown in for the silliness. But yeah, I wanted to entertain people. I wanted to be entertained myself. I made the podcast I wanted to listen to. And it's gone down really well. I mean, we're not the biggest podcast in the world. We're not got the biggest audience, but everyone who listens to us has really enjoyed it. A lot of people say we're one of the podcasts that they wait for. Lots of anticipation. So yeah, it's one of my favourite things to do at the moment is record that podcast, 'cause it's hilarious, because I've got some very funny friends.
So your last game is not a board game and it's not an RPG. It's a skirmish minis game, and this is Frostgrave. Why did you choose Frostgrave?
Well, as I say, I'm an Omni gamer, and as well as cutting my teeth on D&D in my youth, I cut my teeth on Necromunda, and to a lesser extent Warhammer 40k and things like that. And recently I've been getting back into that world, and not wanting to spend a fortune on large armies and things like that, and not really being interested in large armies and things, because that's a hobby in itself. I've started to play more and more skirmish games, these little kind of games you play on a 4x4 map with bits of terrain. You paint your minis. I've always enjoyed painting and things like that. I've dipped in and out of that all my hobbying career. And Frostgrave's just a perfect example of it. Basically, you control a wizard and his band of mercenaries trying to steal various bits of treasure from a frozen city. And it's a campaign game, and so you are every game you play, your war band improves. Some of your guys die, your wizard gets better. It's kind of a little narrative going along there. And it's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to play. Again, I don't see the point in games like, I can't think of one off the top of my head, almost like Descent. If you want a tactical minis game, then just play a skirmish game. If you want a role-playing game, just play D&D. Just play the best version of that genre you want. I don't like this is like the board game equivalent of a blur. It's like, well, why don't you just play things that board games do best? Granted, that's all my own personal taste. I realise that. But if I wanted to play Doom the board game or Descent or something like that, I just play Frostgrave, because it's better, because you've got more freedom, you've got more intricate rules, you've got the whole thing works better than being confined. The board games confine you to things, and that's great for games like Nippon. It's great for games like Railways of the World. It's great for Skull King, but when you're trying to simulate an expansive thing, trying to simulate theme, then I don't think, if you want to simulate theme in battle, then you're much better off going with a minis game than a board game. If you want to simulate theme in narrative, then you're much better off going with D&D or any kind of role-playing game than you are with a board game, because they just do it better. And so why waste your time? That's what I say. So,
one last question. You're driving up to the cabin, you're fleeing the oncoming disaster. The car skids and the backseat flies open. 4 of the games fly out down a ravine, swept away by a river. Which game do you hope is lying on the backseat?
I think D&D. I think because of its endless replayability. And I know we're meant to be talking about board games here, but D&D is the most versatile of all those, and so I'd have to go with that one.
So if people want to contact you and see what you're up to, how do they do that?
Well, the best way probably is to either download our podcast, which is This Game Is Broken. You can find that anywhere you find podcasts, and Spotify these days as well, because we're up to date with things like that. Or you can contact me if you want on thisgameisbrokenpodcast@gmail.com. You can also watch myself and my daughter on Board Game Breakfast over on the Dice Tower, and that's all I'm doing at the moment. But that's enough, I think.
Well, Dan Hughes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if you want to suggest a guest, or if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on @5gamesfordoomsday on Twitter, or you can send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. You can visit the website, 5gamesfordoomsday.com, or you can go to the BGG Guild. And if I haven't had to have been choppered to my woodland pleasure palace to avoid the multicoloured fallout and the radioactive Groucho Marxes, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 games for Doomsday.